Jonathan DePotter is a former corporate high flyer, consulting to Fortune 500 companies prior to becoming a global thought leader in psychedelic plant medicine therapy and founder of Behold Retreats. I'm thrilled to welcome you to Pure Health Hub. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
On a personal note, my whole life has been touched by mental illness. My family has had a long and deep connection with it. I've had to support and nurse a number of my family members as a child, and then, of course, inevitably my own battles myself. So understanding both treatment and potential outcomes is a huge personal trip for me. But I'm also sure for a great deal of our Pure Health Hub community, because I know I'm not alone. So let's get started. So some of us in the 40 plus age group have had clandestine experiences with psychedelic therapy in the years gone by. I can't say I would have considered it a mental health treatment at the time, but in fact, at times it's been considered the cause of psychosis. What's the science behind it, and what did we, how did we discover the benefits?
Yeah, so there's two pieces of context that I think are helpful to share in relation to that question. I think the first is that the current mental health paradigm that we have is not particularly helpful. What we've done is we've set this bar at a subjective level, and we've said, if Jonathan's below this bar, then he's got a problem and he needs treatment. And if Jonathan's above this bar, then he's totally fine and there's nothing to work on. He can just carry on. And that's fundamentally not it. The reality is that each of us is at a particular level of consciousness, and that each of us is able to move up or indeed even down those level of consciousness. So, when people have some traumatic event or some big change in their life that moves them, say, down into a state of depression, what's happened is that they've dropped in their level of consciousness. And so there's, perhaps some traumatic experience needs to be accessed, processed, released in order for that person to come back up to what might be considered their previous state or more normal state of consciousness. But also that person can equally continue up further. So it's not just that there's a treatment and then the problem's gone, but actually each of us is able to continue our own evolution endlessly. There's no kind of limitation upon the levels of consciousness that can be reached, which is, I think, what makes this space much more exciting than it's typically given credit for. So that's the first piece. The second piece, I think, really relates to our own individual divinity, our own individual connection with source. It's still, for me personally, it's there's a little bit of a cringe when I say the word divinity, because I come from quite spiritual parents, quite alternative parents, but I went very much down the alternate route. I was, very much down the corporate path, the materialistic path, not believing in anything spiritual. I was strictly an atheist, reading Richard Dawkins books and all of that sort of thing. So opening this door has come as a bit of a surprise to me in my early 30s. And so the second piece that I'll contextualize this with is, I think this work really represents each of us reconnecting with our own divinity and in our own connection with source, ultimately, or God, or spirituality, or consciousness, or whatever language makes an individual feel comfortable. And so when we talk about how we discovered the benefits, I think we've known the benefits for thousands of years. It's just that there was, through time, whether we talk about colonial times or more recent history, say in the 1960s and 70s in the US, where there was a pretty persistent push to demonize these substances. Colonialism wiped out a great deal of the plant medicine traditions around the world at great cost. Thankfully, a number of them survived deep in the Amazon or high in the Andes, and that's predominantly where or even in Australia. And so they're reemerging from those places in the present time, which is amazing and beautiful. But it's actually that the suppression effort has failed over time. It's not that we've necessarily more recently discovered the benefits, but I understand the question, which is the scientific, angle to this is that we were doing a lot of science in the 1950s. Then it was all kind of shut down as LSD in particular escaped the lab, and it was found, flowing over into music concerts with people with flowers in their hair. And so now it's a super sensitive, time for this subject, because a lot of people are catching on to it. There's a lot of excitement around it. People are pretty desperate to be better, particularly with everything happening in relation to COVID. And so it's a very sensitive time, because there's a bit of a supply and demand challenge, honestly, of, we have a limitation of supply of people who can do this work at a high level, and we have millions, hundreds of millions of people who want to be better. So hopefully that kind of answers the question to some extent.
No, I've got it. Absolutely. I mean, I guess it's a little bit like traditional Chinese medicine, isn't it? In the sense that it's been around for centuries, but it's managed to remain contained in China, and therefore, it remains to this day. So great. So what was it that inspired you to research and now advocate for plant medicine treatment, going from that corporate world?
Yeah, I guess it was my own personal experience. I think that if I wind back 5 years to my consulting times in Accenture, I was working pretty hard, as we generally do within these big corporations that are designed to hire people and turn those into profit.
Yes.
And there's not necessarily anything intrinsically wrong with that, but at the end of 5 years of working very intensively in Hong Kong in that sort of paradigm and system, I just felt like fundamentally something was missing. I was, offered the next promotion and the next deal and the next client, and I thought I have to get off this treadmill for a second and just get a different perspective. And so, as I mentioned at the time, I was an atheist, and so I decided just to take a year off. And so as part of that, a couple of friends came and joined me in Peru. And then through my own journey, I, number one, opened the door to spirituality. I uncovered some repressed childhood trauma. I count myself to be super blessed in the sense that I had amazing, protective, loving, caring parents, but yet there was some suppressed and repressed childhood trauma that was there. And so as these neurogenetic medicines begin to, work their magic, it's very common for many of us to rediscover some of these repressed and suppressed childhood trauma that is manifesting in our everyday character. Sometimes people say, well, why would I want to go and uncover that? And it's like, well, it's already hurting you. It's just that you don't know that it's there, and you don't really understand the connection between that and the limitations that you're placing upon yourself. So the moment that you unlock those things, it's a real point of leverage to be, more peaceful, more loving, more joyful, more courageous, more empathetic, all of those sorts of good things that each of us wants to be. And so, I think, again, that's what this work represents.
And sadly, this happens often when we're much older. You're fortunate in a sense that we were exposed to this much earlier. And that's why I think, this is really important for us, is to get this across, because it manifests in your life in physical ways that can be really damaging. So the Imperial College London has created the Centre for Psychedelic Research, and the centre has made it their mission to bring psychedelic science into the mainstream. Mm-hmm. So specifically for mental health care, for conditions such as anorexia, depression, PTSD. How soon do you think this is going to become a reality?
That's a really interesting question. So, again, I'll link this back to the paradigm that we're in, which is, at the moment, these are Schedule 1 or Class A substances. And so in order for them to move from that categorization into this is now permissible for treatment, the way that the current governments look at that is, well, there needs to be a very substantial reason for us to be able to do that. And so what's interesting about this is that, well, there's a couple of dynamics that I think are of great interest, which then lead to the speed at which this may or may not emerge. So I think, first and foremost, the scientific method is not necessarily in the greatest interests of this work. So it's not necessarily that we need to take one human being and give them 2 therapy sessions and sit them down in a comfortable chair at 47.3 degrees and apply dosage and then result takes place. This is non-deterministic work in of the highest order. You know, we as individuals obviously are pretty complex. These medicines, you know, take for example an ayahuasca, 463 compounds within ayahuasca, which is why it's often overlooked by the kind of the current psychedelic research, because they just look at that and they say, well, that doesn't fit our, you know, our obsession in the modern Western world with compound isolation and dosage and variance control, exactly, small box. And so, okay, well, maybe we'll just not do that research. Let's take synthetic psilocybin and see what we can do with that. And again, there's nothing wrong with that as a starting point. But if we talk about treatment and getting people the best outcomes, and predictably so, then our scientific deterministic model, I think, is going to be very limited in relation to its ability to do so. So one of the things that we've been doing is to try to bridge that gap between what, you know, advanced spiritual facilitators know and understand, and in terms of the energetic and the spiritual nature of this work, and what some of the scientists are doing. Because I think the real opportunity here is actually to put very new stakes in the ground from a scientific research perspective, and to see whether some of those things can be proven out to really enhance the predictability of high quality patient outcomes. And so when that's proven to be the case, and I think that will take a lot more spiritual knowledge in the scientific realm, then the speed at which these medicines can come into general acceptance, because the science is caught up to the spiritual understanding, then that becomes very, very exciting.
So not my lifetime.
Well,
or even yours, probably.
Well, I think I was pretty optimistic up until and I still am optimistic, but we had a recent conversation which helped me. We had a conversation between some of my spiritual mentors and some of the leading psychedelic scientists. And these guys are really at the cutting edge of what's going on. And just to understand the gap of understanding and even language. And actually, there was a gentleman that was part of that call, Adam Gazelli, who's doing, you know, amazing neurological work. And he was able to really bridge that gap with frequency and vibration. You know, that's a universal language that whether you're spiritual or whether you're scientific, you can make sense of. And so I think there's a great opportunity and potential there, but the gap is still quite large. But I think we'll get there within your lifetime, because at the moment, I think we're just at this point of inflection in relation to acceptance and interest in relation to psychedelic medicine. And the demand from the customer base, you know, I speak with customers all day long. The demand from a customer base is so far more advanced than what the psychedelic researchers are working on. The understanding of the customers is so much more advanced than the psychedelic.
All right. Wow.
Yeah, because they get their interests are more in the energetic and the spiritual, whereas the scientific, you know, they don't even accept that as reality. And so I don't say this to diminish the scientific in any way, shape, or form. Like, I totally get it, because, you know, that's to a large extent, that's still the world that we live in. And it's exciting because this represents the intersection of science and spirituality in a way that we haven't seen. So it's all very exciting.
Well, it is really exciting, because the spiritual seems to have left us a long time ago with the colonialism, as we were talking about before. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. So at a time when the world's population is experiencing a significant rise in mental illness, even prior to COVID-19 presenting itself, how can psychedelic science help to improve our mental health and the care that is offered? Now, you may cover these in some of the questions, but I'm just going to follow these anyway.
Yeah. I guess the first thing I would say is that people can do so without psychedelic science. Our mental health is a function of obviously so many different things, but it's often a large part of what we're giving energy to and what we're paying attention to. So in times of strife and challenges, many of us find ourselves in, you know, watching the media cycle can have a very debilitating effect on our mental health. Whereas we don't need to give that our energy. That's a choice that we have. And so I would say that, you know, again, psychedelic science really does represent an opportunity to improve mental health. But the substances themselves aren't necessarily positive. I think we probably both know people that have done lots of psychedelics whose lives haven't improved. And so, even psychedelic retreats in of themselves, lots of those happening in Costa Rica, Mexico, Peru, Netherlands, they don't necessarily in of themselves yield positive outcomes. They can yield very profound experiences, psychedelic experiences, but there's many more pieces that need to come together in order for people to benefit. So the pieces that really need to come together are around the mental, right? So becoming more able to abstract away from our monkey mind and see those patterns of thinking and limiting beliefs as what they are, which is they're just phenomenon arising in our lower self, and that our higher self can observe those from a different vantage point and thank the monkey mind for its defense mechanisms that it's trying to put forward that keep itself locked inside its present paradigm. The other is the emotional work. We've all got layers of trauma stored in our physical body. Could be intergenerational, could be, the example I sometimes give is that imagine a 5-year-old child who's carrying in groceries from mom. Mom's had a long bad day. Child drops some groceries and mom says, "You never get anything right, just get out of the way." 5-year-old can't actually distinguish between that which should take hold in the subconscious and that which is just mom at the end of a bad day. That does take hold in the subconscious. The next day, the child's at school playing ball, gets the ball, that same tape plays back. "Oh, you never get anything right, just get out of the way." Immediately passes the ball. All of a sudden, we've got a mental pattern, an emotional pattern that is setting a child on a fundamentally different developmental path. Now, clearly, that's just the most minor of infractions in terms of what we've all gone through in our early childhood. So, as people do this work, it's pretty much universal that they relive some of these childhood experiences that have developmentally affected them. And sometimes when people try to say these stories out loud, it sounds so ridiculous how minor it is, but it's been so major to them. And so that's fundamentally what's important. And so being able to reaccess these things and release out some of those mental and emotional limitations that we have is one or two components that are very important. The third, which is generally overlooked, is the energetic or the spiritual. So many of us, again, have energetic, energetic dissonance. We have energies within our being that are not serving us. And so, the skilled healers that are working in this space can actually begin to harmonize or remove some of those dissonant energies. And that makes such a big improvement to the quality of our experience.
Yeah. Wow. I could go so much deeper into that, but we'll save that for another time. Okay, so then with the practicalities, what are the various plant medicines and what are the applications? So which medicine for what?
Yeah, my perspective on this is that our role as Behold Retreats is not so much to say, "Oh, well, you should do this or you should do that," but rather to facilitate our clients' own decision-making process, right? So some people, I'll frame that a little bit more broadly by saying some people want to be no further than 20 feet away from a latte machine throughout the, white walls and nice artwork and, comfort is primary. I'm already going to be exploring the depths of my subconscious, like, please, a good latte. And other people,
white walls.
Exactly. And then other people are telling me, "Well, no, I want the full shamanistic immersion with, if there's an opportunity to put some mud under my eyes." And, some people even do this quite intensively where it's solitary and it's in silence for, say, 10 days, super intense. Right. And so it's, part of the role that we play is to facilitate facilitate the experience that feels right for people to experience this work. And that relates to medicine as well. So, predominantly we work with ayahuasca, psilocybin, and 5-MeO DMT. But we also work with San Pedro, a little bit less. And, those are, generally speaking, there's a lot of demand for ayahuasca. And then second to that, I would say psilocybin, and then third to that, 5-MeO DMT. And they're very different medicines, right? So as I mentioned before, ayahuasca is a very complex medicine. It's a combination of two plants.
I lose you.
Lying psychedelic molecule is the spirit molecule, DMT. And so a lot of people are drawn to that because they're very profound spiritual journeys, very introspective, and connect us, in a very deep way. Psilocybin is also an amazing medicine. I think for some people, it's ayahuasca feels a bit intense, and so psilocybin is, can be a softer place to start, which is totally fine and beautiful. And then 5-MeO DMT is certainly not for everyone. It's probably it probably fits well into the Australian psyche in the sense that it's 4 to 6 times more powerful than ayahuasca. So it's really giving it one. But
Can you
very
ease
short
into these things?
Yeah, so I mean, I would encourage people to, spend years working up to a 5-MeO DMT experience, because otherwise you just, the consciousness leaves the body immediately. It's the cessation of duality within the space of 10 seconds. There's no more subject object. You're just shot into, the higher realms of consciousness itself. And so to be able to integrate those sorts of experiences, you're better off starting with psilocybin or ayahuasca first, and then moving to the more powerful experiences.
Wow. I mean, another one that could go on, but let's get a little bit into the assistance. So again, many governments, and particularly the Australian government, hasn't invested anywhere near enough into mental health support. And people are suffering, the effects of debilitating mental illness. So many tragically fall through the large gaps of support. So I know it's early days, but how do you see this being able to fill some of these gaps?
Yeah, and I think that's going to be very interesting, because there's a number of debates in relation to this that are raging at full force in the US at the moment. So Oregon itself has decided to pass a law that allows psilocybin to be worked with outside of the frame of the medical, so outside of the frame of the FDA, which is very interesting and very exciting. Because again, I think our modern Western medical model has benefits, but it also has limitations. And so, I think fundamentally what this work represents is a return to freedom of choice. And so, these are powerful experiences. If I can only go and do this in a lab with a doctor, I think that would diminish, would deeply diminish the sacredness in the experiences themselves. So, so the debate is really raging in terms of what's the right model. Personally, I am optimistic that the right thing will evolve. At the moment, the primary conversation is, are these good? Are these bad? Should they be legal? Should they be illegal? But then there's 101 other second order and third order questions that come to light, and now there's a lot more quality conversation happening in relation to those. So I think putting our faith in evolution is usually the right answer, and to recognize that if synthetic psilocybin has limitations in terms of the medical model has limitations in terms of the breakthroughs that people are able to have, or the levels of consciousness that people are able to reach, well, then people are going to continue to go down to Peru and Costa Rica and have an ayahuasca experience, because once they've hit this roof, and then it's going to begin, well, why do I have to continue to fly over here to have this much better experience? Why can't I just have this experience closer to home? And so the conversation will continue to evolve, and we will ultimately find ourselves in the right place with the right treatments and the right medicines and the right models and the right people and the right this and the right that. But it's gonna take a lot of people who want to control things and manage things and hold tightly onto, this is the right thing, this is the wrong thing, and lots of finger pointing and all of that nonsense. But the right thing will evolve.
And look, I mean, if Oregon's doing it, how good is that? I mean, that's, at least they're listening to, just not the straight line. And I guess that's what we're trying to do with Pure Health Hub, is try and bring the medical to the table with the holistic, so that we can try and have a talk and a discussion and a debate about how we can incorporate the two. But we seem to be at poles apart, so I guess it's similar, but on a much grander scale for you.
Well,
okay.
I think I was just going to say, I think that any people who are trying to hotly discuss and debate some dynamic in relation to this space should just go do a 1 week ayahuasca retreat, both sides, and then, take a week off and then go and have their discussion.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. That's a good idea. We should recommend that highly. Okay, and speaking of locations, so Behold Retreats facilitates programs in countries where it's, of course, legal to use psychoactive drugs for therapeutic reasons. Which countries are they, and how do they differ in terms of a treatment experience?
Yeah, so at the moment we have experiences in Costa Rica, Mexico, Peru, and the Netherlands, and we're just opening up Jamaica and Portugal as well. So at the moment, I had envisaged that there would be a larger market that was more performance oriented. So people who are already doing really well and want to be doing even better. But what we're finding is actually there needs to be a trigger in order for people to do this work. So, as you shared before, often people in their 40s and 50s, they get to a point where they're like, okay, yes. This isn't working. I need something else, and maybe this is an option. So at the moment in Costa Rica, we're mostly doing ayahuasca retreats. In Mexico, we're doing some work with ayahuasca, but also 5-MeO DMT. In the Netherlands, we're doing work predominantly with psilocybin, and in Portugal, we'll be doing work with psilocybin and some ayahuasca as well.
Yeah, right. Okay. Wow. So do you think there's going to be a number of other countries that'll sort of come online, I guess, for want of a better term?
Yeah, so I've been speaking with a couple of the countries here in Asia, a couple of the governments to try to actually encourage them to think about this from a wellness and a tourism perspective, right? I think, Australia is, excuse my French, but it's goddamn far from just about everywhere. And so, I think it's in a little straight. And so, I think if there was an option, say, to open up in Thailand or in Laos, then I think, that would be a massive opportunity for Thailand, for Laos to attract the Asian market. I always say I've been speaking with some of the government representatives in Laos, and I always say, it's very difficult to find a good noodle soup in the Netherlands or in Costa Rica. And that's what the Asian market wants, right? They don't want to be eating tortillas and beans after, the most challenging experience of their life.
They want that congee, or they want to, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and I think for Thailand in particular, there's tons of amazing resorts. They're known for medical wellness. They're known for tourism. They're known for new age wellness, right? Meditation and yoga. And so all of these things. And it's really, I think it represents an enormous opportunity for this country, but it will take a bit for the wheels to turn.
Yeah, exactly. So we talk about the benefits, and there's significant benefits clearly for mental health challenges, people suffering mental health challenges. In what other areas could it benefit the community, though?
It's tempting for me to say everything, but I would caveat that again by saying,
for example, like neuroscience and social science is something they talk about. Are there some examples there that you could share?
Yeah, so these are very strong neurogenetic medicines, right? And so there's a great quote by Stan Grof, which is, he said that, and I'm going to bumble it probably, but you'll get the point. He says, psychedelics are going to be for neuroscience and for our understanding of the brain and consciousness, what the telescope was for astronomy, and the telescope and the microscope for biology and for chemistry. And I think that's
look right through.
Exactly. Or be able to just see, and fundamentally, there's a great CIA paper, and it's actually on the CIA website. I'll be happy to share it with you afterwards. And in this paper, it describes the nature of the universe as a hologram of consciousness, which is that the whole is made of the part and the part is made of the whole. And so through these experiences, we can come to understand this ourselves. The whole universe is within us. And so once we clear out some of the shit, so to speak, once we go through some of the healing experiences that are required on the physical, mental, and spiritual level, then we have much broader access to basically the universe at large. And so, the people who have been doing this work for decades really can explore anything in this universe just by going within. And so within this paper that's written by the CIA, they actually recognize the mystics. They say, oh, this is what the mystics have been saying for millennia. They're correct. And so it's very interesting to see that sitting on the CIA website.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I'll share it over with you. And it's and so fundamentally that's it. It's that consciousness is primary, and that reality, material reality, is actually secondary. And so we're looking in the wrong direction. We're looking out, going, I wonder if I can afford this new car, or get this girlfriend, or and we're trying to optimize out here where we need to be optimizing is in here, and we can understand and know and feel everything. And look at some of these monks high in the mountains in Tibet. I mean, they couldn't be happier. They don't got a thing, but they couldn't be happier. And you go, okay, there's clearly something here.
Absolutely. And I was going to say that, how many Asian nations and countries and cultures rather are, living a life that is, we would consider, very poor and very difficult, and they're smiling and they're happy, and, what are we missing here? So we're clearly missing something. So there are a number, okay, so we'll get down to, so there are a number of there are a few plant medicine retreats around the world. What sets Behold retreats apart?
So I shared with you before those different elements that need to come together. So we at the moment, we've stopped doing retreats in of themselves. There's tons of money to be made doing high-end psychedelic retreats. But that's actually that's not the work. That's not the outcome. And so it was interesting because we had some really high-flying clients that I was pairing them up with a good coach and a good therapist in order to help them do the mental and emotional work before and after. And they were just skipping the mental and emotional work and going into the plant medicine retreat. And they're having a very profound experience, but it's actually bypassing the ego. It's bypassing the work to be done. Yeah. So you can reach these higher states of consciousness without doing your work here in this world. Yeah. We've been incarnated for a human experience. So we want to evolve our human experience, not our spiritual experience, without evolving our human experience. And so now we're doing a lot more, we're requiring people actually to step through a 3-week program before and after, because that's the way that they're going to get the biggest shift, to do the mental and emotional work, to do some of the energetic work, to begin meditating, to knock out all of those lower level things like booze and edibles and porn and media consumption and all of those things that are keeping us at a lower vibration, and really providing a lot more guidance so that, okay, do these things for 7 weeks. It's only 7 weeks. We'll put a 1-week retreat in the middle. And the shifts that are possible is just incredible. We had a gentleman who's just come back, and he says, this has been more amazing than I ever imagined, clearing 50 years worth of shit in 10 days. And so, that's what it's all about. Like I always say to the team, marketing and, website and this and that, it's all noise. What matters is the customer outcome. That's the unit of productivity. Everything else is just, steps along the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Fundamental changes, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, wow. How interesting. Well, I am going to ask you just one more question. You've kind of answered it a little bit, but how does a boy from Hawaii via New Zealand end up in Asia consulting Fortune 500 companies, end up here facilitating psychotropic retreats for health outcomes? You sort of answered a little bit in the beginning, but maybe just a little more info.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is stay curious, right? Follow that thing that you think is interesting, right? And I think we're such an exciting time to be alive, because we all know people that, you sit down with them over lunch or whatever, and you come to understand what they're curious about. And you're just like, wow, that's so interesting. And and so we're at a time where there's so much availability of information, and so many people are further developing so many of these different rabbit holes in relation to their interests and understanding. And it's like, wow, that's so interesting. And so what I would say is I just followed my nose and followed my curiosity. And I think good things happen. I think we're all here for a reason. Yeah. We all have divine purpose. We all have unique gifts, skills, and strengths. None of us are an outlier or don't have a purpose. So it's just about, removing those layers of what we are not, so that we can see what we truly are. And then the rest will unfold for each of us in kind.
And it's a hard place to get to, but clearly you have. Thanks, Jonathan. I seriously appreciate your time with us today. I'm sure our community is going to get a great deal out of it. Sincerely appreciate it. Look forward to chatting again soon.
Thank you so much, Lindsay.
Cheers. Bye. Stop recording. Oh God, we're going to get, you know me. I mean, really, where's my tech?